The last book I wrote, the last book that's been published is called The Curious Case of BINAYAK SEN. It's an examination of the case against this man whom, who worked for a number of years in Chhattisgarh and elsewhere as a doctor in the rural areas. And in 2007, the Chhattisgarh government actually filed a case against BINAYAK SEN, accusing him of being a courier for the Maoists and having Maoist connections. So then what happened was that it took a few years, but in December 2010, the case came to fruition and he was actually sentenced to life imprisonment by a Chhattisgarh Sessions Court. So soon after that, I decided to take a look at this case, and I just thought it was important to, for the judiciary, and this case in particular, to be subject to layman scrutiny. I think it's now, you don't need legal training to look at some of these cases. So that's why I started looking at this. And I got hold of the evidence and just went through the judgment, went through the charge sheets, and that's what the book is about. But I didn't want to make it just an examination of the case, so it has also got a lot about rural health and the state of rural health and BINAYAK SEN working in those areas, and what is the meaning of this kind of work, what is the relevance of this kind of work. I think that has a bearing on what happened to him. So that's what this the book is really about. I just think that he was stepping on too many powerful toes. The thing is that when you're a doctor in the rural parts of the country, and I know a little bit about this because I have a brother and his wife who've been working in who are doctors and who've been working in rural parts of India, Chhattisgarh and Orissa and all for many years. You start realizing very quickly that healthcare is not just about the disease that somebody comes in with or the rabies that he's got or whatever it is. It's also about hunger, it's about malnutrition, and then you look wider, it's about the lack of sanitation, it's about lack of education, lack of hospitals, lack of governance in the end, and lack of justice too. So you start talking about some of these things. I think it's inevitable. Every doctor inevitably starts wondering about these issues and starts talking about them. So BINAYAK was just one more of those doctors who did that. And I think his training as a doctor made him aware of these kinds of issues. So, when you do that, you're going to be annoying some people. And I think in the end, the Chhattisgarh government just decided they had to, make a case out of this guy, or make an example out of this guy. Maybe teach him a lesson, and then therefore teach others a lesson. So I think that's what's happened. On the evidence that they supplied to the court, I can't see any case against him. It's just that there is no case. No, he's been sentenced to life imprisonment, and he spent 4 months in jail, and the Supreme Court gave him bail. So he's out on bail now, but there are 2 appeals in progress. So one is his appeal against his sentencing, and then there is another appeal. The Chhattisgarh government actually filed cases under a number of sections of the IPC. So he was sentenced under some of them and acquitted under some others. So the Chhattisgarh government has gone and appealed against those acquittals. So, saying that he should be sentenced under those. So those 2 appeals from both sides are in the works. But the way the courts are, those will take years and years before anything happens. So in effect, he's a convict out on bail right now. I mean, not in effect, he is a convict out on bail. Yeah, I got actually HarperCollins, my publisher. Even though I thought I would like to do this, it was actually HarperCollins who first approached me about 3 weeks after he was sentenced, and so he was in jail in January of 2011. That's when they approached me, and that's when I started doing my research and getting the materials, going and starting to meet. I went and met his wife, and then 3-4 months after that he got bail, and then I went and met him in Raipur, and then met him later, and then met some lawyers concerned, all that, and then started digesting all the material that I'd got. So, and by about September of that year, I had my first draft essentially ready. So January of 2011, September that year, I had my first draft, but then we had to go back and forth with the editor, some pruning of what I'd written and rewriting some parts, adding a little bit more here and there. So actual final manuscript probably went to them in maybe June of 2012. and then the book came out in August or September, if I recall. So that's the time frame. Yeah. Well, for one thing, my previous book is with HarperCollins, and I think the editor just liked the book, and she liked what I wrote for them. So perhaps she knew I could write a book. But also, I have been interested in these issues, and I've been writing about rural health, poverty, education, these kind of development issues for a very, very long time. My book before that, I had a book in 2002, which is about the Narmada. That was by Penguin, but at the time my editor was actually with Penguin, so maybe she remembered that also. So that I have been writing not only books but also articles about these kinds of issues for a very long time. So I think she just knew that, I mean, I had a body of work to show, and so she knew that I could, that I would take an interest in this, and that it was something that was, you know, up my sleeve, so to speak. So that's why she approached me. Well, you know, I really think the lesson of the book is, I think, if I had to pick one lesson, it is about how it's important in a democracy for citizens to look at what the judiciary does. And I don't mean just the Supreme Court, I mean every level of the judiciary. Not because they're necessarily evil or corrupt, I'm not trying to make that case, but it's necessary for us to understand what goes on in the name of justice. And only when we do that will there be a better process of justice. And I think that's the overall meta theme, you might say, that I'd like this book to drive home. And then, of course, it's in specific, it's about BINAYAK SEN and what happened to him, and about how the evidence really is, there is no evidence to convict him. But that's just this one case, and I hope that people who read this book might see parallels to other cases where there have also been no evidence, and I know that it might generate some greater public scrutiny. That's my kind of optimistic hope for the book. I'm you know, let's leave it at that. I would like it to be seen like that. Well, so I'll tell you what I should actually spell out is that it is not, and it did not set out to be a biography of BINAYAK SEN, because I really think that's almost irrelevant, and other people have done biographies, and I'm not interested in making the case that here is such a great man, he's done such great work, and therefore he's innocent. That's not, even if good men can do bad things, so that's not my point. So I really wanted to make the case about the case, focus on the case. So obviously there is some material about him and his background, what kind of work he did, what kind of education he had. But then large sections are about the case itself, looking at the judgment, looking at the evidence, looking at the charge sheets, etc. And then my personal feeling was that if I just put all those together, it would just become one long, dull tome, which nobody would read. So I had to pick and choose, but I also chose consciously to put in what are called in the book interludes, where there are stories from, because I feel like one of the only good things I'm any good at is telling stories. So there are stories from rural Chhattisgarh about healthcare that I personally experienced, about, you know, cases that I saw, or you know, and I just felt like those are relevant to what happened to BINAYAK SEN. So, and those are interleave these chapters about the judgment and charge sheet and so on.